If you're a leader and you've been following me, you know I just finished talking about the burden of leadership. And the real goal of talking about the burden of leadership was to look both from Moses' perspective and then from the perspective of the people of Israel. I've always looked from Moses' perspective because he's the great prophet. And I've always wanted to be like Moses. But I never really looked from the people's perspective. The burden of a leader for Moses is the fact that he doesn't have a shared Hebrew experience. He was adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. He was raised in the palace. And then when he went out and killed the Egyptian, he went to the land of Midian for 40 years. So he really doesn't know what slavery is like for this demographic of people. Yet this demographic of people has now been set free after 430 years of slavery. And Moses, who tried to get out of leading them, is now set to lead them. We are now in Exodus 18, and Moses is leading all of these people. The Bible tells us it was 600,000 men besides women and children. And so here in chapter 18, Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian, heard about everything that God had done for Moses and for his people, the Israelites. He heard especially about how God had rescued them from Egypt. And so earlier, Moses had sent his wife Zipporah and his two sons back to Jethro, who had taken them in, which is amazing to me. It seems like Moses is almost like, hey, Zipporah, take the boys, go back to Midian, be with your father and be with your family because I'm about to do this thing for the Lord and it may get ugly. I don't know if that was the conversation, but I just wonder why he sent them back or what he sent them back for. Well, Jethro decides we can go visit him. When he shows up, he spends time with Moses. Moses tells him all that's going on. And Jethro's response is, praise the Lord, for he has rescued you from the Egyptians and from Pharaoh. Yes, he has rescued Israel from the powerful hand of Egypt. I know now that the Lord is greater than all other gods because he rescued his people from the oppression of the proud Egyptians. So Jethro, even from Midian, knows what's going on. What ends up happening the next day is that Moses goes to work. Verse 13, Moses took his seat to hear the people's disputes against each other. Well, again, let me put myself in both Moses' shoes and let me put myself in these people's shoes. The Israelites were slaves. They've been mistreated. They've been marginalized. They've been oppressed. And what is essentially happening is disputes are rising up with them. The Bible says they waited before him, listen, morning until evening. And what were they looking for? They were looking for justice. They were looking for their needs to be met. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he asked, what are you really accomplishing here? Why are you trying to do all of this alone while everyone stands around you from morning until evening? Listen, Moses went to work and Moses was clearly overworked. I call this the benefit of leadership. So the first one is the burden of leadership. This is the benefit of leadership. The hard part about being a leader, as many of you who are listening know because you're leaders, is who do you go to when things are hard, when you need to make that tough decision? And there are some people listening right now going, oh, I got this mentor, I got that mentor. And there are others who say they have that mentor, they're naming people that they go to, but if they're to be honest, they're not really comfortable going to those people. And half the time they don't even tell the whole story because they're afraid of what might happen. And as a leader, I know I've done that. I thank God for the men in my life and the women in my life that I can go to and ask, hey, what do you think about this? And they could be springboards. But here, Moses is overworked he's understaffed. He's working overtime. And he's also then underachieving because he's trying to handle the load by himself. I identify with Moses. Moses is going, man, God gave me this ministry. God gave me this job. I want to do it well. I want to steward it well. Jethro sees that. The benefit of leadership is you do not have to do things on your own. But there's a certain way that every leader needs to lead, and it's pointed out in this text, and God's word helps us understand how to lead. Listen, Moses replied, I'm doing this because the people come to me to get a ruling from God. They come to me for justice, and I'm the Supreme Court. When a dispute arises, they come to me. I'm the one who settles the case between the quarreling parties. I inform the people of God's decrees and give them his instructions. Listen, Jethro says this is a benefit of leadership. Jethro says this is not good. Jethro was up and out. He had eagle's eyes. Eagle eyes can look at an entire environment. Shout out to Rick Wellock, who's one of my mentors who has taught me this. You can see the whole environment. You can see everything, and you can always swoop down and get back in the weeds. Instead of having mouse eyes see what's right in front of you. They know where the snake is, how to hide, how to get the cheese, but at the end of the day, they have no higher vantage point. And we all need to have leaders that we benefit from, that have a higher vantage point, that are able to look at our situation objectively and say, hey, this is not good. So his father-in-law says, you're going to wear yourself out. Listen, and the people too. That is phenomenal to me. Jethro is not just looking at his son-in-law and saying, hey, this is not good for you, son-in-law, because the in-laws are here and we'd like to spend time with you and you working. No, he's saying, listen, this is not good for you. This is also not good for your fill in the blank employees, your students, your parishioners, your church staff, like the people who are following you. This is not good for them either. This job is too heavy a burden for you to handle all by yourself. Listen to me. Let me give you a word of advice, and may God be with you. Jethro is communicating, hey, man, I'm just going to give you some advice. But at the end of the day, the Lord has to confirm that. Every good leader, the benefit of leadership is people who are leading with your best interest and the best interest of those who follow you are going to give you their advice, but then step back and say, ultimately, you got to go to God to figure out whether or not that advice should be heeded. And so he says, you should continue to be the representative before God. Bring their disputes to him. So he's saying, look, man, if that's what you're passionate about, if that's your wheelhouse, if you're the leader and God has called you there, if that's what the Lord wants you to do, you keep doing that. However, that's going up. But then going out means teaching them God's decrees and giving them his instructions, showing them how to conduct their lives. What he basically says is you need to define it, you need to describe it, and you need to demonstrate it. Listen, every leader needs to define it, describe it, and demonstrate it. And that's what he says here. Teach them God's decrees, give them his instructions, show them how to conduct their lives. So all he's doing is laying out standard operating procedures. Look, man, this is how everybody should respond. So when you policy make, when you lay it out, when you write out that employee handbook, what you're doing is defining, describing, and demonstrate for people what should be happening. The next thing he says, verse 21, but select from all the people. Listen, so he's not just saying, hey, from this set of, no, he's saying, hey, from all the people, here's what you need to do. You need to select some capable, honest men who fear God and hate bribes. He did two things. He's allowing him to understand the division of labor. Look, man, you're going to need to divide the labor up. And he even includes the job description. Notice, capable men. That means men who have skill. Honest men. That means men who have integrity. Men who worship God. And men who hate bribes. That means they're men of truth, men of character. Skilled men, men who have integrity, but then also men who are determined. And the way that I define determined is using letters. To deter and terminate, I borrow the TER, but you're terminating deterrences with extreme prejudice. They won't let anything get in their way. Anything like what? Like a bribe. So these honest men who worship God, they're men of character and men who have skill. That is talent refined in the fire of practice and experience. Shout out to Kip Berry, our executive director, who gave me that definition a long time ago. They should always be available to solve the people's common disputes, but have them bring the major cases to you. So he's divided labor, and now he's delegating authority so that they can work all together. Listen, they will help you carry the load, making the task easier for you if you follow this advice. And if God commands you to do so, then you'll be able to endure the pressures, and all these people will go home in peace. Moses listened to his father-in-law's advice. He followed his suggestions. So Moses chose capable men from all over Israel. He appointed them as leaders over the people. Listen, Jethro said, appoint them as leaders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. And what does he do? Thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. These men were always available to solve the people's common disputes. They brought the major cases to Moses, but they took care of all of the smaller matters themselves. Soon after this, Moses said goodbye to his father-in-law, who returned to his own land. Quickly, I want to give you what is called the Pope module for success. It just happens to correspond with my last name. I will readily admit I did not invent this. My brother Titus did. Prioritize, organize, plan, execute. Every single leader needs standard operating procedures that define, describe, and demonstrate both the problems and the solutions. Some people desire to solve problems. Some people desire to make sure problems never occur by having solutions that prevent problems from occurring. All that Jethro tells him to do is prioritize not just what's important, but what is first and most important. Many of us do not have non-negotiables, some things that we say, hey, these are the most 3 to 5 important things to me, and they are the things, as Gary Keller says in his book, The One Thing, such that by doing them, everything else becomes easy or unnecessary. All of us need standard operating procedures. All of us need in our personal lives those priorities that we say, okay, these are the most important things. Anything within these categories I'm able to say yes to. Anything outside of them, I need to say no to. We all have a to-do list. Many of us need a stop doing list because we are not using all of our time, energy, and effort to do things that are most deeply satisfying, that we know God has gifted us at, and that we know he called us to. So that's prioritized. Then we organize. When he devised the label, he already gave standard operating procedures. Here's the overall, here's how it's defined, described, and demonstrated. But then he gives local operating procedures. This is how these leaders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens ought to operate day to day. At the end of the day, if we don't organize, we can't delegate authority, but we have to be organized in a way that the big picture vision is given to people in small, measurable, attainable, relevant, tangible goals, SMART goals. You probably have heard of that. The next thing is to plan. You all will always be available, verse 26, and you'll handle the people's common disputes. What will inevitably happen, likely, is the leaders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens are going to confer with one another. And as they confer with one another, they'll be able to come up with local operating procedures. Oh, okay. Based upon what Moses has said in his definition, description, and demonstration, I now can see that this is how this dispute that I'm working with applies in that. And when they can't figure it out, what they do is they bring the major cases to Moses. Now, Moses is up and out. He's not inundated with all the things in the weeds, and he can always fly in if he needs to, but he can have eagle eyes, and he doesn't have to have mouse eyes. These leaders of thousands, because everything is broken up in the hundreds and fifties and tens, these are the thousands really just need to confer with the leaders of hundreds. That's 10 people. The leaders of hundreds need to confer with the leaders of 50s. That's 2 people. The leaders of 50s need to confer with the leaders of 10s. That's 5 people. So the reality is there is an organization and a plan that allows for execution. It allows for things to get done. There are people who've gone ahead of us. There are people alongside of us, and there are people coming behind us who need our leadership, who long for our leadership. There are people who we need to learn from, and we need their leadership. My challenge and encouragement to you, my challenge and encouragement to me is take advantage of the benefits of the leaders around you. We have all kinds of leaders a click away, and not every leader is infallible. But as I watched this morning, just to make sure that in the last video I said it correctly, I watched Yoda talk to Luke again this morning. I was just reminded, he said, listen, I told you to pass on everything that you learned, everything, including your failures. And he says the greatest teacher is failure. And that's the thing. A lot of times as a leader, we act like success is all that we have. No, we have success as the sidekick because the hero, failure, has taught us so much. As a leader myself, when you think about the type of leader you are and how you lead, I just want to remind you, you will fail. It's a part of being a leader. Moses was not the greatest leader in this example, but Jethro came alongside him and said, hey, what you're doing is not good. If Moses didn't have humility, Moses could have looked at Jethro and been like, man, I'm leading this organization of 600,000 people. We just got out from Pharaoh. Who are you to tell me what's going on? No, Moses had the humility to say, you know what? I don't have a shared Hebrew experience. I'm not leading these people. I'm not saying Moses said this as much as I'm putting myself in Moses' shoes, and maybe this is what Moses thought. I'm a Hebrew. I don't have a shared Hebrew experience. I'm leading all of these people. I am wearing out. I don't have enough time to do anything. Listen, when you only go into God to teach Sunday school, or you only go into God when you got to teach Bible study, that's not sufficient for a quiet time or quality time or a devotional or however you want to say it. That's not sufficient for you to be able to grow. You need some good, unrestricted time to just spend with the Lord, get vision for your life, for your family, and for where you're going. That happens in this text. And I believe if he wouldn't have listened to Jethro, we'd have never heard about Moses and the 10 Commandments. And it had to be Joshua and the 10 Commandments because he'd have died of a heart attack or a stroke just overworking himself. Remember, he was overworked, understaffed. And because of that, he was underachieving. Many of us need the humility to benefit from another leader. And if you're not willing to have that humility, I'm here to tell you, just as Jethro said, not only will you wear away, but so will the people who follow you. I'm encouraged by this, but I'm also challenged to say, Timotheus, where are the places where you're not leading by benefiting from other leaders? Where are the places where you're just doing it on your own instead of allowing Aaron and Hur to come alongside you and lift up your arms? Isn't it amazing that this text comes right after Aaron and Hur, who let Moses know, man, when you're weary, we right here. Moses still didn't develop that leadership, that division of labor, and that delegation of authority. Leadership is huge. I hope it encourages you today to know that you can benefit from other leaders, and I hope you've benefited from this. Love you. Peace.